everybody, and welcome to Decoding the WSL, the podcast dedicated to the stats and facts in the WSL. Today is a slightly different sort of episode because we're talking all things Fantasy WSL. It is back for a second season after last year's inaugural one. I'm going to talk through my selection and why I picked the players that I have. I'm your host, Sam Biccarino. Yes, welcome to Decoding the WSL. As I said, it is all about Fantasy WSL today. So, Fantasy WSL was started at the start of last season by what I believe is quite a small team of people, but they've done a fantastic job with it. Over 30,000 people played last year. I like to think that I know my stuff because I finished number 266 in the world, but that may have just been luck. We'll see what comes this season if I can recreate it. But because the game was so good last season, I thought I'd do an episode to talk you through my team that I've picked this year. And at the end of it, I'll give you my league code so you can come and join my league. There's over 100 people in it already, so it's going to be great competition in there. We'll start off with some of the basics. I suspect that a lot of people will be familiar with the idea of fantasy football from FPL. It's very similar in that you get a £100 million budget to pick 15 players, and you get points for various things, appearances, goals, clean sheets, that sort of thing. There are a few differences which I'll touch on as we get through. When I'm picking my team, there's a few things that I like to stick to, especially at the start of the season each year. So one of the first things is that all around the pitch, I like to try and pick players that are expected to start every week. If a player doesn't play, they're not going to get you any points. And there will be players that you think will play and end up coming off, or they may pick up an injury in the week running up to the game, something like that you can't really account for. So where the budget allows, I try and get at least sort of 13, 14 players that are going to be playing every week. The next thing I do is that I have a look at the teams that have a good run in the first few weeks. So, maybe the first 2 to 5 matches, and try and pick 3 players, which is the maximum from each of those teams. The 2 teams that I've picked out for this season are Manchester United and Chelsea. I don't think there's anyone else that specifically stands out as having a good run at the start of the season. Man City have quite a good run for the first 7 or so games, other than their first match, which is away at Arsenal. So I'm not opposed to picking players from those teams, but I won't sort of prioritise them quite as much and try and diversify the teams in my squad and not have too many players from the same teams if they haven't got the best run of games. Then once those players from Manchester United and Chelsea in this season's case are out of the way, I'm going to be looking for good value elsewhere. So I'm looking at things like, how many points do I think this player will get per million that they're worth? A good way of looking at this from last season's numbers are that if they're getting 10 points over the season per million that they're worth, that's a pretty good value player. If there's still some budget left over at the end of that, then I might try and upgrade a few. If I've picked some players that are maybe 5 million, but I've still got a few million left to spend, I might upgrade to a 7 million and 8 million sort of player. But that's generally the thought process that I go through. It seems to work for me. And of course, picking players that you think will do well is always the best way to go because everyone has different opinions. And if you don't go by your own opinions, everyone just picks the same team. And that's when it gets boring. So pick the players you like, pick players that have got good running games, and pick players that are good value. So yeah, that's the process that I go through when I'm picking a team. Let's move on and I'll tell you exactly who I've picked this season. I'm going to work my way through the team. So obviously I'm going to start with the goalkeepers. I mentioned at the start that Man U and Chelsea are the teams that are sort of my priority teams. For goalkeepers, I didn't want to pick a Chelsea player because they're likely to rotate between Hampton and Musovic, especially with being in multiple competitions. They did this a lot last season. Obviously they had Berger as well, taking up even more minutes. So they didn't have a player that was playing every week. Man United, on the other hand, have got Joyce, who will most likely play every single week. She's also a bargain because she's only 4 million. And with Man United not bringing in another keeper now that Mary Earps has left, I know there were rumours of Lisa Kopp. Obviously that hasn't happened. I think Joyce is an absolute steal and is definitely my first pick as a goalkeeper. Now, Fallon's probably going to be used for me pretty much any time Manchester United aren't playing a team in the top 3. So they're going to play most of the season, and my second keeper needs to be someone who's cheap because they're barely ever going to get used. They need to be cheap but still good value. Ideally, if there's someone that plays consistently, that'd be fantastic. And importantly, they need to have good fixtures when Manchester United have their tough ones. So, when Manchester United are playing the top 3 teams, this player needs to be playing someone not in the top 3. So my pick for my second keeper is Sophie Baggerly, because she's likely to be starting every game for Brighton. She is the joint cheapest player in the whole of Fantasy WSL. And she got 52 points last season, which of the keepers that are the same price as her at 4 million, that is the most. The other important thing that I said was that they need to have good fixtures when Manchester United have poor ones. If we look at the first few fixtures for Manchester United that are difficult ones, you've got Chelsea on game week 3. Brighton will be playing away at Villa. And Manchester United have Arsenal on game week 6, where Brighton will be hosting Leicester. So, they're not games where Bagley is definitely going to be keeping a clean sheet, but he's probably going to have a better chance of getting more points than Fallon will. So Bagley is my second keeper. Let's move on to the defenders. Now, I know I said Manchester United and Chelsea are my priority teams, but I haven't actually got any Manchester United defenders in the squad. That's because there's other players further up the pitch that I wanted to pick. Obviously, there's only 3 players per team as a maximum, so I couldn't fit them in as well. But I do have a Chelsea player in my back line, and that is Millie Bright. She's got really good minutes in pre-season. I think she's probably going to start quite a lot, if not every game, especially at the start of the season. And at 6.5 million, I think she's quite good value. She's probably going to pick up quite a few clean sheets. She's not necessarily going to be one that's going to get loads of assists. She might get the odd goal, but the clean sheets are really where you're going to get your points from the defenders. So at 6.5 million for a Chelsea player, I think that's quite a good pick. The next player I've got in my back line is Ashley Neville. I think she is quite a bargain at just 5 million this season. She got 55 points last season, and for the last few years has been a very reliable player at Spurs. She plays a lot of minutes and gets good output, especially in terms of assists. Spurs' first match is at home to Palace. So Palace being the new kids on the block, they might not come out all guns blazing, especially with a lot of new players. So I think Spurs will get an easy win in match week 1 and therefore potentially a clean sheet. And I think Ash Neville's going to have a whale of a time. My next pick is Emily Fox at 5 million. I think she is another bargain. I did mention that Arsenal don't have the best start to the season, especially on game week 1, hosting Man City at the Emirates. But after that, it's not too bad. So looking more long term, I think she's quite a good pick. She got 44 points in just half a season last season. So I think for 5 million, her value is really good, especially if she starts playing quite often. The only negative here is that Wienreuter is back, but although she may play in the same position as Emily Fox, obviously at that right back for Arsenal, I think Fox will still keep her starting place. As I mentioned, Arsenal don't have the best start to the season with Man City at home. So that is why Emily Fox is actually my only Arsenal player in the squad. Moving on to the last 2 defenders, I've actually got 2 from the same club, both from Leicester City, who you may not think was a team that is going to be high at the table and therefore get loads of points, but I believe these 2 players are quite good value. So the first one that I've gone for is Sophie Howard. Now, she's not 100% nailed on to be a starter. Charlotte Swaby and Julie Thibault have also had a lot of minutes in pre-season, and there's only 2 positions at centre-back at Leicester for 3 players to go into. But at just 4.5 million, I'm willing to take a risk. She got 49 points last season, and personally, I'm expecting Leicester to do a bit better than they did last campaign. So if she does start, I think Sophie Howard is a great option. If she doesn't start, then maybe a week or 2 into the season, I start using my transfers and put someone else in. The other player that I've got from Leicester is Sam Tierney. So with Aileen Whelan leaving the club, I believe Sam Tierney is the new captain. So she's got a good chance of playing quite a lot. She played every match last season. She's classed as a defender. I know Fantasy WSL use Opta's classification to say whether someone's a defender, a midfielder, or a forward. But anyone that's watched Leicester play last season will know that Sam Tierney played much more in midfield. She got 68 points last season. So although she is 6.5 million, more expensive than Emily Fox and Ashley Neville, I think she could end up being quite good value because she's more likely to be further up the pitch, more likely to score, get an assist, that kind of thing. Because realistically, I think she's probably going to be starting at centre mid for Leicester this season. If she does end up being poor value, similar to the other players I've already mentioned, we have transfers, we can make use in the squad, and with 6.5 million there, we can probably get a decent defender in. And it may be one that if I do take her out, then I can likely get an Arsenal player for that amount of money, and I know by then who Arsenal are going to have, and they'll have got the hard Man City game out of the way. Now, this is probably a good moment for me to explain something that Fantasy WSL have introduced this season, which is visionary points. So from game week 2 onwards, you can get visionary points on players that are selected by under 2% of Fantasy WSL players. If a player qualifies for visionary points, then they will earn an extra 3 points if they earn any points other than minutes played. So goals, assists, clean sheets, that kind of stuff. Stattorino could well be a person that will do this for me, because at the moment, as I record anyway, she is currently selected by 1.95% of players, so under that 2% barrier, and would be able to score points. Sophie Howard as well might end up being a player that fits into this, because she's close at 2.03%. My theory is that teams being created closer to the season starting, and maybe after game week 1, are more likely to pick players from the top teams, and therefore Howard's selection, currently at 2.03%, may drop and go below that 2% barrier and then be eligible for visionary points. So, for a quick recap of my defenders, I have Millie Bright from Chelsea, I have Ash Neville from Spurs, I have Emily Fox from Arsenal, and then 2 Leicester players in Sophie Howard and Sam Tierney. So I've not just put loads of players in from one squad, I've got a bit of diversification, and I think that's a pretty good back line and will get a lot of points throughout the season. Now, let's move on to the midfielders. The WSL as a whole is quite a high scoring league in terms of goals, so defenders don't tend to get as many points compared to something like FPL, which a lot of you will be familiar with. And midfielders and forwards are where most of your points will come from. So you'll probably be unsurprised to hear that of my main 2 teams, Chelsea and Man United, I've got 3 players in the midfield 5. The first of those is Johanna Rytting-Kaneryd. She is my most expensive player so far at 9 million. She was one of the highest scoring midfielders last year with 76 points. And I believe she started every preseason friendly for Bonpastor, so is likely to be a key player for them. It may be the case that when the Champions League games start coming along, she gets prioritised for those, because I think that's the competition Chelsea will favour this season. But I'm going to keep her in at the start, and we'll see how the season goes on. If I do need to transfer her out, 9 million is a lot of money and can be used to spend wisely elsewhere. My second player is also from Chelsea, but is significantly cheaper, and it is Vika Kaptein. So she joined last season, although went back on loan. So when she came back, I didn't really expect her to play much, maybe even get loaned out again. Wasn't expecting much from her. But again, I believe she started every preseason game from Bonpastor, so I'm expecting that as the season starts, that will continue, and Kaptein's going to be getting a lot of pitch time. So for someone that is playing at Chelsea, a team that will be one of the favourites for the league, starting every game, and is 6.5 million as a midfielder, I think that's an absolute steal. She's not one that many people have picked up on so far, because she's only been selected by 2.7%. So she's a good differential, although she's not quite selected by few enough people to be eligible for the visionary points. Obviously, that's under 2%, but I still think at 6.5 million, she could be an absolute bargain. A third player is a Manchester United player, and is one that, if you look at any of my content and listen to me talk, you will be unsurprised to hear that I've put Grace Clinton in my side. I think she was one of the best players in the league last season at Spurs. And at Manchester United, if the system works around her well, and I think she'll be playing alongside Ella Toone in that system, we could see her getting quite a lot of points, and maybe even getting more than the 79 points she got last season. If she does end up being a consistent starter within the squad, even at 8.5 million, I think she'll be really good value, because she'll be getting more points than she did last season. If not, we can always transfer her out, but we'll cross that bridge if we need to come to it. Anyone that does play FPL will probably have heard the phrase Pep Roulette, where Man City players are brilliant to have in your squad, but really difficult to pick, because Pep rotates his team so much you don't know who's going to be picked. Manchester United, on the other hand, are the opposite of that. Mark Skinner used fewer players in the WSL season than any other manager, with 20. So it's likely that if she's in the squad and if she's starting games, that will happen for the rest of the season. Manchester United don't have European competitions. They may get a bit of cup games in the way, but the league is going to be their main focus this year, especially getting into that top 3. So if she's playing regularly in the WSL, she's going to be regularly getting us loads of points. My next pick is someone that I think might benefit actually from Clinton leaving Spurs, and that is Evelina Suminen. So at Spurs last season, she got 61 points, which means at 7 million, she's not too bad value. She's probably not quite getting that 10 points per million if she gets another 61 this year. But like I said, I think with Clinton having gone, she could be more of a creative force this year. She had really good numbers last year in the passing statistics for Spurs, whereas Bizet and Clinton had the good numbers for dribbling. With Spurs losing those two players, I think they might transition more from a dribbling type of creation to a passing creation, and Evelina Suminen will be the main player for that. Also, in pre-season, she has scored from the spot, so although she might not be the first pick, I don't know if Bethany England and Martha Thomas were actually on the pitch when that happened, but she may well be an option for penalties, which are then easy points. Now, you might remember at the start that I said I tried to get 13 or 14 players that will be playing week in, week out, which means there will be one or two that won't. And this next player is one that I don't think will be a regular starter. But my fifth midfielder is Izzy Hobson. She hit the headlines last season because she became the youngest ever goal scorer in the WSL. And she has got some more minutes for Everton in pre-season. So if she does start getting even those substitute appearances, she could be quite good value at 4.5 million. She's probably not someone that I'm going to start very often, but if she comes on the pitch as a substitute and I've got other players that I thought might start but end up not playing at all, she can be the sort of player that's going to be getting me a decent number of points at just 4.5 million. She's also, as I record, at 1.95% ownership. So if she does manage to come on and get goals, if she does manage to come on and get points for goals or assists, then I'll also get the bonus visionary points as well. So to recap my midfield, I have two Chelsea players in Johanna Rytting-Kaneryd and Vika Kaptein. I have Grace Clinton from Manchester United. I have Evelina Suminen from Spurs and Izzy Hobson from Everton. Now let's move on to the forwards. Yes, these are your moneymakers, the players that are going to get you the most points this season. So we're still going through the same values. We're still trying to get Manchester United and Chelsea players. We're still trying to get players at good value. But I also said earlier that if I end up with money left over, that this is where I'm going to end up spending that money. And you'll see with my selections that I have spent the money on forwards. So my first selection, you'll be unsurprised to hear, is Bunny Shaw. She was the highest scoring player in Fantasy WSL last season with 137 points. So despite being 12.5 million, if she stays fit and doesn't get rested for Champions League games, I think she'll be really good value. There's 34% ownership on this player, so a lot of people are thinking the same as well. I did mention that she's got a difficult start to the season with Man City. The first game is away at Arsenal, but in fantasy terms, I think that she's similar to Haaland in FPL, where she's just inevitable. It doesn't matter who she plays. She's almost certainly going to get on the score sheet. And after match week 1, she's got a good run of fixtures. So for me, she was an easy choice, even though she's so expensive. My second forward is the last of the 6 Chelsea Man United players, and it is Elizabeth Turlin. She was the second top scorer in the league last year behind Bunny Shaw. She scored 13 goals in a Brighton team that didn't create many chances. In fantasy, she got the 5th highest points last season with 101. And I don't think it's a strange opinion to think that she's going to do better for Manchester United than she did for Brighton last season. So I think she's going to score more goals. She may get some more assists. And most importantly for us in what we're talking about today, she's going to be getting more points in fantasy. So she is 10.5 million. If she can recreate her 101 points, she's at about that 10 points per million mark. So it's decent value. I think she will get even more. So for me, she was an easy choice. And finally is a player that I think will be the best value pick in my entire team. So my third forward and my 15th pick of my team is Naomi Mouchon from Leicester. In the French league last season, other than Lyon and PSG players, she was the top scorer in the league. She's moved over to Leicester with her manager, Amandine Mikel, so she has some familiarity with that. I don't know if you have watched any of Leicester's pre-season games, listener, but I watched a bit and she looks like an absolute monster. She reminds me a bit of Mayra Ramirez in the way she plays. She's obviously not quite got the same sort of stature within the game, but that type of player that can do a bit of everything. She can still be quicker than her defender. She can be stronger. She can link play. And I think at 4.5 million, she's going to be an absolute steal and potentially, if she stays fit, one that I will keep throughout the season because she'll increase in value. She'll give me more transfer budget. So if she does ever get injured, then I can then use that budget to get better players than spending the 4.5 million that I've still got for her on someone else. The other good thing with her is that she's only at 0.93% ownership as I record this. So she could be in line for visionary points after match week 2. So to complete my squad, I've gone for Bunny Shaw, Elizabeth Turland, and Naomi Mouchon. Man City player, Man United, and Leicester. So again, a bit of diversification in there. I think this front three are going to get a lot of points throughout the season. I think they're going to be really good value for money. So exactly what you need from your forwards. Now, before you run away and copy all of the selections that I've made, because I've given you such great reasoning for them, obviously, I'm going to talk you through what I'm doing in game week 1. So my formation is going to be a 3-4-3. In goal, I've got Fallon Tullis-Joyce over Sophie Bagley. I think that's unsurprising with West Ham being the home fixture for Man United. They're much more likely to get a clean sheet than Brighton will be. In my defence, I've got Millie Bright, who is at home to Villa, Ashley Neville, who is at home to Palace. And then for my third defender, it was a bit of a selection because I don't think any of my defenders are going to get a clean sheet. Emily Fox is at home to City, and then Howard and Tierney are away at Liverpool. So in the end, I've gone for Emily Fox purely because I think she's more likely to get a goal or an assist than Tierney or Howard. I don't think any of them are going to get a clean sheet, so it's going to be the sort of attacking points that I'm more likely to get something from. In my midfield, I've got 4-player midfield, obviously. I've got Canada and Captain, because they are both at home to Villa. Got a good start to the season for Chelsea. I've got Greta Clinton, who, obviously, like Fallon, is at home to West Ham. And then I've put Suminin at home to Palace as my 4th midfielder, which leaves Izzy Hobson on the bench. As I said earlier, I'm not sure she's going to be starting, but if she's on the bench for me and she ends up subbing on for Everton, you know, maybe one of my starting 11 doesn't actually end up playing. She can come on, get some points, that kind of thing. That's where your good value comes into play. My forwards, I've obviously got all 3 on. So Elizabeth Turland, who is at home to West Ham, Naomi Mouchon, who is away at Liverpool, and Bunny Shaw, who is away at Arsenal. Then the final thing that we need to pick is a captain and a vice-captain. For me, the captain pick is a simple one. I think Manchester United are the team that is most likely to win their opening game at home to West Ham. And I think the player for Manchester United that is most likely to get points is Elizabeth Turland. So Elizabeth Turland is going to be my captain. In terms of a vice-captain, normally this is something that's going to take quite a lot of thought because you've got to think if your captain doesn't play, who is then going to be the most likely? It might not necessarily be someone at the same club. For this week, I'm going to just play it safe and go for Bunny Shaw. If for whatever reason Elizabeth Turland doesn't play last minute after I've selected my team, then I think Bunny Shaw is a safe bet. She may not get a hat-trick away at Arsenal, but there's a good chance she's still going to pop up with a goal. So there we have it, listener. Thank you for joining me today as I've run through my team. If you want to share your fantasy team with me, tag me on X or Instagram or wherever you want, and I will rate your team for you. Don't forget to join the Stattorino League as well, the mini league on the Fantasy WSL app. There's over 100 of you in it already, which is fantastic. I will put the code in the show notes so you can find it. Obviously, follow me on X, Instagram, TikTok at Stattorino. And if you've enjoyed the episode, do follow wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you don't miss an episode and leave a 5-star review. It's really helpful to help people find the podcast, especially while we're new and we're still growing. Other than that, have a great day, listener, and I will see you next time.